Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar tonight on eating for restoration and regeneration. My name is Heather Schofield, and I'm a homeopathic doctor and the medical educational director with Biomed and Terra Medica. I'm pleased to be able to talk about eating for restoration and regeneration. It's definitely a passion of mine, and it goes very beautifully with biological medicine and also with paleosanum therapy. So let's get started. What I want to cover tonight is some inspirational quotes about eating, and then talking about healthy gut, healthy body, why a healthy gut leads to a healthy body, and vice versa, the constituents of the gut, and then leading into eating for restoration and regeneration. I also want to talk about antigens and hidden intestinal allergies, and this is very much what Dr. Konrad Wertmann put all of his premise on when he was actively practicing and also talking about sanum therapy and the importance of treating the gut and the importance of diet as well. Then we're going to talk about restorative and regenerative diet, what that actually includes, and why you want to be using this with your patients and also with yourself and your family and your friends. I'm going to give you some recipe ideas because there's no point in talking about the ideas of diet without giving you some take-home with that. And if we have time, I'm going to go through the art of alkalizing as well, at least in its very briefest form, just to talk about some ways to alkalize the body. So to begin with, and this is a very important point in the whole thing, is dieta. When we talk about diet, it's not so much about dieting and losing weight and being on this thing where you have to eat food in a certain way. Diet really came from the Greek word, meaning way of life and a change of the attitude towards your body. And this is a really important key, and it's also really important to stress this for patients, because when we're eating 3 times a day, sometimes more frequently, and we should be allowing food to really be our medicine. We should be eating and having this as a way of life, and we need to change our attitude about food and how we eat and what we're eating so that we can promote the best health and the best maintenance of health for life. There are no shortage of diets. There's lots of diets that one can prescribe to, and many of them are lifestyles, and many of them are very healthy, but then we also have many that are fads and not so healthy. Things like vegetarianism, veganism, the paleo diet, which is still fairly popular at this point. There's belief-based diets, there's weight control diets, there's low-carb and low-fat diets, there's crash diets, there's detoxing diets, there's medically based diets, including things like being gluten-free, diabetic, ketogenic, and they definitely serve very important components for patients that have different conditions that need to be monitored and dealt with through food. There's eating for your blood type, there's food combining diets, there's low glycemic diets, there's a Mediterranean diet, there's raw, and the list goes on and on and on. I was actually really surprised to find how many diets there were. I just Googled it through Wikipedia, and the pages just went on and on and on. I had no idea that there was so many different diets out there. But the point is, with all of this, we're not talking about a diet per se. Eating for restoration and regeneration, it's not a fad diet. It's a purposeful way of eating to restore health and maintain health, and this is lifelong health. And so that's the thing that I really want for you to be able to take away from this, that we're not talking about a diet here. We're talking about eating for restoring and regenerating our body, and then for maintaining lifelong health. So let's talk about some quotes. These are some of the people who've inspired me in my life, and you may have heard of them and you may have not, and if you haven't heard of them, I would encourage you to go and seek out their books and read some of them. But for the first one, we all have been inspired by Hippocrates. Our food should be our medicine, and our medicine should be our food. And once again, as I mentioned already, we're eating 3 times or more frequently every day, and so this is something that we have control over, and this is something that we should be putting into our bodies so that our food really can be our medicine and to keep us healthy. Michael Pollan, he is an author of a number of books, And one of my favorite quotes from him is, "Eat food, not too much, mostly plants." He is really talking about bringing food back to its basics and really thinking about how we eat. One of the things he also laid out is 7 rules of eating. And I really like these because it just, at the very minimum, makes you think about eating. And it also gets our patients thinking about what they're putting in their bodies. These are 7 general rules that are actually pretty good rules to live by when we're thinking about food. So let's go through them then. So number 1, don't eat anything your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. When you pick up that box of portable yogurt tubes or eat something with 15 ingredients that you can't pronounce, ask yourself, what are those things doing there? And what are those things in general? Number 2, don't eat anything with more than 5 ingredients or ingredients you can't pronounce. So basically, this is the whole idea about not eating processed food, and when you are eating packaged food, to make sure that it does not have a huge list of ingredients and the ingredients that are in there are something that you actually recognize. Shopping the supermarket. So number 3, stay out of the middle of the supermarket. Shop the perimeter of the store. Real food tends to be on the outer edges of the store near the loading docks and the refrigeration aisles, where they can be replaced with fresh foods when it goes bad. If you do shop the outside perimeter of the grocery store, or if you pay attention, then you'll notice that you'll go through the produce, and you'll also go through the bread and some of the wheat products. You'll go through the dairy, and and the meat. So you're basically going to be shopping in a lot of cases for foods that have fewer than 5 ingredients when you shop the perimeter. And then go into the middle of the aisle for things like rice and quinoa and oatmeal and some of the packaged things that are still, low number of ingredients. Okay, so then number 4, don't eat anything that won't eventually rot. Of course, there's exceptions, honey as a rule or maple syrup. However, things like Twinkies that never go bad are not food. Number 5, it's not just what you eat, but how you eat. Always leave the table a little hungry, Poland says. Many cultures have rules that you stop eating before you are full. In Japan, they say until you are 4/5 full. Islamic culture has a similar rule, and in German culture, they say tie off the sack before it's full. It's definitely a hard thing to start practicing, but once you get used to it, then it becomes much easier. Also, we often eat quickly at the table, and we overeat without realizing it because our stomach hasn't caught up with the full feeling by the time we've finished eating. So if you're eating until you're 4/5 full, you will, within 20 minutes, in most cases, feel like you're 100% full. Okay, now number 6, families traditionally ate together around a table and not a TV at regular meal times. It's a good tradition. Enjoy meals with the people you love. It allows us to be more conscientious of what we're eating, to be more present when we're eating, and it also creates a really nice time for families to connect and get together and to relax. So eating mealtime, specifically dinner is a really good time, allows everybody to sit down and get together. It's a good tradition to start with your family. It's a good tradition to make sure that your patients are also following if they're not, or if they're rushing around, if they've got young families, and that's a very easy thing to have happen in life. Okay, and then finally, number 7, don't buy food where you buy your gasoline. In the U.S., 20% of food is eaten in the car. I really like that. Don't buy food where you buy your gasoline, because the reality is it's probably going to just be fast, junky food like Twinkies. Well, maybe in Canada it's actually hard to find Twinkies. So other things, chips and popsicles and sodas and such. Okay, now I want to go on to Barbara Kingsolver. She wrote this book, Animal Vegetable Miracle, A Year of Food Life. And the thing that was really interesting about this book is she decided to take a year with her family and move to a farm in South Carolina, or maybe it was North Carolina, in one of those. And when they decided to become completely self-sufficient food-wise. So they grew everything they needed on their farm, and what they didn't have, they would trade with local farmers. So the idea was not to be spending money on food. And she has some beautiful quotes and some beautiful concepts about food and eating. And this book I thought was a real eye-opener and also very inspirational. So one of the quotes I found here is, planning complex, beautiful meals and investing one's heart and time in their preparation is the opposite of self-indulgence. Kitchen-based family gatherings are process-oriented, cooperative, and in the best of worlds, nourishing and soulful. A lot of calories get used up before anyone sits down to consume. But more importantly, a lot of talk happens first. News exchanged, secrets revealed across generations, paths cleared with a touch of an arm. I have given and received some of my life's most important hugs with those big oven-mitt potholers on both hands. So again, it's talking about family-based eating and family-based cooking, and really having that as a tradition and a way to be connecting. Okay, and then here's another one. So this is based again about her and on her farm, and this is really about canning and her canning veggies and such. So, but right now, looking at all these jars in the pantry gave me a happy, connected feeling, as if I had roots growing right there through the soles of my shoes into the dirt of my farm. I understand that's a pretty subjective value, not necessarily impressive to an outsider. It's a value nonetheless. Okay, and then I want to just finish off with Barbara Kingsolver, and this one I thought was actually kind of funny, and this is why I've included it, because there is a bit of humor that goes along with this one. And again, this is coming from Animal Vegetable Miracle. So, it was a little story that she had given her an antidote. One day we came home from some errands to find a grocery sack of zucchini hanging on our mailbox. The perpetrator, of course, was nowhere in sight. Garrison Keeler says July is the only time of year when country people lock their cars in the church parking lot, so people won't put squash on the front seat. I used to think that was a joke. It's a relaxed atmosphere in our little town, plus our neighbors keep an eye out and will, if asked, tell us the make and model of every vehicle that enters the lane to our farm. So the family was a bit surprised when I started double-checking the security of doors and gates anytime we were about to leave the premises. And then she says, "Do I have to explain the obvious?" I asked impatiently. "Somebody might break in and put zucchini in our house." So just a little bit of humor. Too much zucchini, trying to get rid of it, breaking into people's homes and cars to deliver it. Okay, now Dr. Thomas Rau, he, of course, is so entwined with biological medicine and also with Paracelsus and with Pleosanum, and he talks very much about nutrition. He has a book which I'm going to be talking about a little bit later called The Swiss Secret to Optimal Health, and he also has Biological Medicine, The Future of Natural Healing. And one of his big premises is about nutrition and eating. And a lot of the information tonight about eating for restoration and regeneration is derived from Dr. Rau and also from Dr. Wertman. So I think that this is a good quote to lead us into our next section. Good health can only prevail within a well-regulated body. And that's really the point, well-regulated body. At the heart of the body in balance is proper nutrition. So the point is here to have a well-regulated body, or to get it back into a well-regulated place, we really need to be having proper nutrition to be able to support that. And finally, again, back to Hippocrates, all disease begins in the gut. And as practitioners in the more complementary role, a lot of us already know this, and a lot of us practice this way too, treat the gut. And so let's talk about that then. Healthy gut, healthy body. A healthy gut and balanced intestinal flora will lead to proper digestion and a strong immune system. This is of the utmost importance for health and recovery of chronic disease and illness. So a big part of what we're now going to be talking about is a healthy gut and balanced intestinal flora, and this will allow health and wellness to prevail. Who needs to restore gut health? Everyone essentially can benefit from improving gut health, as a healthy gut leads to a healthy body. And so the reasons which were kind of indicated already, an unhealthy gut and poor bacterial flora is very common due to our modern lifestyle and diet. One does not need to have digestive issues to be a good candidate to rebalance intestinal health, especially if dealing with chronic health conditions. And I'm going to be talking about the links with hidden intestinal allergies to chronic health conditions. And so in a lot of cases, we have patients who may not have complaints or concerns or issues or symptoms showing up in the intestinal tract, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're still not good candidates for improving their gut health. The other thing, too, with our modern lifestyle and diet, and in Canada, and I know in the U.S., this is such a common thing, is that a lot of meat is eaten, a lot of coffee or tea is drank, a lot of soda is also drank, and then a lot of processed foods, including white type things, breads, flours, pastas, cookies, sweets, treats. Those often are a big part of what our diet is. Lots of families definitely include fruits and vegetables and whole grains, but they don't necessarily include them to the extent that perhaps they need to in order to have a restorative diet within the ability to restore their health. So here are some processes or gut damaging factors to consider. So starting from birth and then as life progresses, there's many different types of gut damaging factors that need to be considered. The type of delivery at birth is one of the first ones. For babies that are delivered vaginally, there is a lot of processes that are very beneficial to this, including getting inoculated with microflora through the vaginal canal. So then with babies that are born via C-section, which is very common, they aren't necessarily receiving or being exposed to this first set of microbiota that are very healthy in the body and for regulation and such, and also starting to populate their bodies. Whether an infant is breastfed or not is also a big factor. Breastfed infants tend to have healthier guts than formula-fed infants. And to the degree where any breast milk is definitely better than none, but exclusive until 6 months is very beneficial. And then to a year to 2 years and beyond can also be very beneficial for the gut development, the gut immunity, and also the flora. Also, the types of foods that are eaten in the first years of life also have a big impact on the gut. And one of the big things is about exposure to dairy, cow dairy specifically, and the proteins involved can be very gut damaging. Dysbiosis, so candidas and yeast, can be gut damaging. Chronic infections, overacidity of the body, which is something we're going to be talking in a lot more detail about in a little bit. Food allergies are very gut damaging and also very damaging to the Peyer's patches, so the immune system. Chronic stress, heavy metals and toxins, a poor diet or eating the wrong types of foods, and various medical interventions and medications, including antibiotics, can be gut damaging. So these types of conditions are definitely ones to consider for restoring gut health. They include things like digestive disorders, allergies, asthma, constipation, skin conditions, cardiovascular conditions, immune disorders, metabolic conditions, inflammations of any kind, malignancies, autoimmune conditions, joint disorders, depression, fatigue, chronic sinusitis, and postnasal drip. So now let's start talking about the gut and the constituents, or the different parts and makeup of the gut. So we've got the mucous membrane, or we've got the bacterial lining, and then we have the mucous membrane and the Peyer's patches. I'm going to talk about all three of these individually. So the mucous membranes, let's talk about this first. So the intestinal mucous membranes. The small intestine has nearly 10,000 square feet of surface area. This is a huge amount of surface area. And the intestinal tract has the most intensive contact with substances from the outside world. So no wonder food affects us so much. And also think about it, again, we're eating at least 3 times a day and often more often than that. And so it's this constant contact with the outside world. And so why are the mucous membranes so important? It represents a protective barrier for foreign substances entering the body. It's critical for absorption of nutrients. It's also critical for detoxification, the mucus that is produced, and it's a huge amount of mucus. I believe it is liters a day, so it's a really big component of detoxification. Yes, it's 20 liters of intestinal mucus a day is what the small intestine excretes, and so therefore it serves a huge role in the body detoxification. It's involved in acid-base balance and establishing that in the body. It's a major defense system for the body, and it also secretes immune substances, including secretory IgA, which is mucosal immunity. And then the Peyer's patches. So the Peyer's patches are found in these base folds in the intestinal tract. It includes T and B cell production, and 80% of the adult immune system resides in the small intestine, which is made up with these Peyer's patches. If the Peyer's patches or this part of the immune system is overburdened and there's a decreased performance, then the human body often responds by making more lymph nodes, and so you often see adenoid and tonsillar swellings. So think about this in your pediatric patients and the ones that have adenoid or tonsillar enlarged tonsils. And think about their diet, and think about their gut, and think about their immune system, and the fact that there's a good chance that the gut is being overburdened and the immune system is not performing as well as it could. So in some ways, by addressing these, we're not just addressing the tonsils or the adenoids. We're really looking for a root cause, and in this case, the gut plays a big role in that. And then finally, the bacterial lining. So this is the intestinal flora. There is 100 trillion bacteria on average that populate each person's gastrointestinal tract. That's enormous. I can't even think of how many that is. It's just enormous. It's 10 times more bacteria than human cells in the body. Dr. Rau jokes and he says that he calls us bacteria bags. Well, you can see why if we have this much bacteria in our body. And realistically, we are bacteria housed within human cells. We have more bacteria in our body than human cells. We have more bacteria in our intestinal tract than human cells. And if we're water and so much bacteria, then really what are we? It's a bit of an interesting philosophical debate that we could potentially have. So the bacterial lining, there's 3 main types of gut flora: the essential flora, which are the friendly, healthy bacteria; the opportunistic flora, which can be disease-producing; and then the transitional flora that we get from food and drink. And so why are the bacterial flora so important? They are so important because they nourish and protect the intestinal mucous membranes. They offer resistance to growth of bad bacteria and fungi, including systemic yeast. They play a huge role in digestion of food, including producing enzymes. They aid nutrient transport through the gut wall. They also detoxify the body, and one of the things they do is they soak up toxins, including arsenic. They deacidify the body, and this can happen through acid-building anaerobic bacteria that transport organically bound acids from the body into the stool to be excreted. They manufacture vitamins: K2, B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B12, folic acid, essential fatty acids, including omega-3 and 6, and various amino acids. A decrease in intestinal flora is correlated to chronic illness, and they play a huge role in stimulation and proper functioning of the immune system. So just a quick look at the types of T lymphocytes in the intestinal wall, and this is related with the immune system and the intestinal flora. In a newborn, it's 98%. When they're school-aged, it's 90%, and then as adults, it's 80%. So in newborns, almost 100% of their immune system, or at least the percentage of T lymphocytes, are bound up with the intestinal wall, and this is why it's so important to be supporting at those young ages a good, healthy intestinal tract and inoculation with the right types of flora, including through breast milk. So how to promote a healthy flora garden? If you look at the soil, it would include the mucous membranes and the Peyer's patches, and the seeds are the intestinal flora, so it's the fertilizer that is one of the big things that we can have our patients continue to work at. They need to keep their soil healthy, and they can do that through our help. They need to make sure that the seeds are there, which they can also do through our help. And then they have control over the fertilizer, which is correct food, and isopathics, which can include the Pleosanum remedies, which we can also offer our patients. But the correct food is something that they have control of multiple times a day to be able to keep the flora healthy and also their body healthy. So let's go back to this whole thing about eating for restoration and regeneration. Eating for restoration and regeneration is a purposeful way of eating to restore and maintain lifelong health. So I mentioned this at the very beginning, and I'm mentioning it again because, as I said before, this isn't about a diet, and it's not about a fad diet. It's about a way of life, like dieta. It's a way of life and a way of thinking and an attitude about health. So some of the things that eating for restoration and regeneration do is it builds a better body from the inside out. And this takes time. It's not something that happens overnight, but it's also not something that takes forever either. Supporting the body to repopulate with new healthy cells until essentially the body is rebuilt. This can be done, and all of our cells and all of our organs are regenerated over time. And so if we are putting the right nutrients in and supporting, we can rebuild a body and repopulate with these new healthy cells. And finally, restoring regulation. Good health can only prevail from a well-regulated body. So one of the things we want to do is promote this regulation, and this can be done through a restorative and regenerative diet. So the other point about eating for restoration and regeneration is by removing all potential allergens and acidifying foods from what we eat on a daily basis, a rapid healing of the intestinal system, mucosal lining, bacterial flora, and Peyer's patches or the immune system will occur. And so this is the whole point of what we're doing. We're eating to restore and regenerate. We're taking potential allergens out of the diet. We're reducing the amount of acidifying foods that are being consumed, but then we're also increasing the number of alkaline foods that are being consumed. And by doing this, we can heal the intestinal system and then maintain it in a healthy way. And that also means we are supporting regenerating the mucosal lining, supporting and repopulating the bacterial flora, and making sure that the Peyer's patches are also in really good working order so that the immune system is also in a good working order. Okay, so I didn't talk about the idea of questions. Feel free, please, to type questions into the chat room, or also there's a Q&A section on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can type any questions in there. I have a question from Don, and so he was asking about the bacteria bag that's mentioned by Dr. Rau, and asking if the appendix is the primary bag of bacteria, not a mere obsolete vestige of former life. And so, yes, Don, that's a very big possibility. I'm not so well versed as to, is that definitely a possibility, but it for sure is. I know Dr. Rau specifically, when he's talking about bacteria bag, he's just talking about the fact that there's 100 trillion bacteria in our gut. And so, therefore, we are so much more bacteria than we are human cells. It's just we've got an outer human cell casing holding on to all the bacteria that exists within our body. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. And also that definitely could lead to a more interesting conversation about the appendix as well. So again, for any questions, please type them into the chat room or into the Q&A section. And I will just be monitoring those as we're going through the rest of our presentation and try to answer them in a timely fashion for you. So I want to talk now about three components: the restoration, regeneration, and regulation, and how food and diet and such all kind of play into these three different categories. So for restoration, what we're looking at restoring, and we're looking at restoring this in people that are chronically ill, people that have digestive or intestinal conditions or symptoms, people that have any types of symptoms that I went through the different lists with before, and also people who want to continue to maintain health. So we want to restore, and then we want to be able to maintain. So restoration includes restoring the gut flora. It also includes restoring the mucous membrane lining of the intestinal tract, and then finally restoring or boosting the immune system through the Peyer's patches. The types of things that can be used to do this include probiotics, isopathics, which are some of the specific pleosanum remedies, fermented foods, diet to support flora, essential fatty acids through oils, and some supplements, which include things like L-glutamine. Regeneration. And so in order to be able to regenerate the gut, the intestinal tract, and the mucous membranes, the bacterial flora, and the immune system, we have to do one really big thing, and that means removing the potential food allergens out of the diet, whether they're known or they're suspected or they're not known. Part of this regenerative idea with the diet is to remove all potential allergens, and so that our patients won't be exposed to them while they're going through and healing and regenerating and restoring. So removing food allergens, and then this allows regeneration of the cells and weakened or diseased organs to, through their time periods, be able to regenerate into healthy new cells. So removing allergens and processed foods will help stop further damage to the gut. And then it also includes things like healthy oils and diet, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. This is Dr. Conrad Wertman. If you ever had the opportunity to have met him in the past, then you're very fortunate, because this is a very wise man as far as health from a biological medicine perspective comes. He is was a gastroenterologist and also a pediatrician. So what he said was, as these types of doctor, you very quickly learn the value of the immune provisions of the intestines. Of course, one also learns their large-scale destruction and consequence impairment of function and latent allergies. So the latent allergies is something we're going to be talking about in a moment. But for him, it's all about making sure that the gut is not being destroyed, and in fact, we're regenerating and restoring it. So just a quick look at the different types of lifespan of various cells in the body, so therefore we have ideas about regeneration. The intestinal bacteria take about 3 weeks to regenerate or to repopulate in a healthy way. The intestinal mucous membranes takes 2 to 4 weeks. Skin, on the other hand, takes anywhere between 2 and 12 months. The liver takes between 6 and 12 months. Muscles take 4 to 18 months. Nerves, 2 to 7 years. So for some people, they need to be eating well for quite some time, and bones 2 to 6 years. Each cell in your body is constantly renewing, and all our organs are constantly regenerating. And then finally, let's talk about regulation. So with regulation, what it allows when we are restored into a well-regulated body is that the body is able to detox, and so this is through the mucus that's produced in the intestinal tract and also through the gut flora. Also be able to deacidify or have a proper acid-base balance within the body. Once you get into a proper acid-base balance and then support with a good diet that includes lots of alkaline food, the body is able then to take over with its natural detoxification and keep this balance. And then finally, regulation with a good gut and healthy functioning gut enhances hormonal and cellular metabolism. And some of the things that can be used to promote regulation include alkalizers, digestive enzymes, definitely the alkaline component of the diet, also avoiding allergens, including lots of fruits and vegetables. Regulation. So Dr. Rau, one of the things at Paracelsus Clinic, and what he says about that, we treat humans, not symptoms or diagnoses. We support the regulatory forces in the human, which brings healing from the inside. So eating for restoration and regeneration, just the basics or kind of an overview before we get into some of the more detailed components of it. We want to build up the intestinal flora. We want to eliminate cow dairy, gluten, and other food sensitivities or potential food sensitivities. We want to reduce the overall amount of protein that's being eaten, mostly the animal-based proteins. And there's very specific reasons for this, which I'll go into in a few minutes. We want to increase vegetables, therefore increasing the alkaline component of our diet. We want to make sure that we're supporting the liver function, the bile flow, and also the bowels, so making sure there's no constipation and that things are moving so the body's able to detox naturally. And we also want to support acid-base balance, which supports the body's milieu or terrain, supports the microorganisms so that we have symbiotic microorganisms that can work within the body, It also supports digestion and good quality digestion, and it supports health of the body overall. So let's talk about antigens, the primary and secondary antigens. And so this is originally according to Dr. Wortman, and he has a few books that are available through Biomed and Terra Medica. One of the books is called The 4 Steps of Isopathic Therapy. I'm just going to write this down here in the chat room. The 4 Steps of Isopathic Therapy. Okay, and this book is a great one as far as an introduction to talking about isopathic therapy, but it also has a really good section in here that talks about antigens, primary and secondary antigens, and then also talks about diet. And it gives you a better understanding of how it all connects with the intestine and the intestinal tract. So when Dr. Wortman is talking about primary antigens, these are foreign food proteins. So it's protein, but foreign food protein that's introduced during the first 9 months of an infant's life. And so this includes things like cow's milk, hen's eggs, and potentially wheat or gluten. Where this becomes problematic is children have, by nature, at this age, a leaky gut, and it's partially so that they can absorb a lot as they're growing. And so if they're absorbing these foreign proteins over generations and generations, the body overall starts to potentially build up allergens or allergies to these types of proteins and is not able to handle them as well, which then potentially causes different types of conditions or symptoms that you see starting in childhood, asthmas, eczemas, and such things like that. And so the whole idea with this is to avoid these primary antigens in the first year of life for an infant, but then if the damage has already been done, then you want to be able to reverse some of this and do some healing instead. The secondary antigens are other types of proteins that sensitivities develop over time because the gut is already in a compromised state. So things like soy, nuts, and other types of things that you would see. Oh, okay. So just sorry for the pause there. I got another question from Donna, and talking about how to test for food allergies. This is a really big topic for discussion, and so I know a lot of practitioners, they do muscle testing or food sensitivity testing using different types of feedback devices. So that's one way to do it. However, with that, you want to make sure that you're an experienced practitioner with the testing. I am not really well versed in food allergy testing, and so I think that maybe what I'll do is I will send this as an answer in the follow-up email that I'm going to be including. There are a variety of ways, and there's a variety of ways that practitioners really do prefer to do food allergy testing. I also know that Dr. Rau, in his book on biological medicine, he has a whole chapter dedicated to food allergies and what is the best way to be doing testing with that. If I remember correctly, there's a whole variety of things that he definitely talks about that are ways to do it and what he believes are the best ways of food allergy testing. So sorry, Donna, I'm not able to give you an exact answer at this moment, but what I will do is make sure that I follow up in a seminar, in a follow-up email for that. And so the doctor's name is Dr. Thomas Rau, and it's through Biomed and Terra Medica. We have his book, Biological Medicine, and it details it in there as well. Okay, so here is an image of the mucosa, the intestinal mucosa, healthy and atrophic. So on the left-hand side, healthy mucous membrane that is intact in the intestinal tract. So you see the villi and the microvilli. There's lots of surface area for absorption. And then you see on the right-hand side the atrophic mucous membrane of the intestinal tract after exposure or damage from primary antigens. Things are flattened out and almost like a moon surface type idea. And you've got less opportunity for absorption, there's less surface area, and now there's potentially bigger spaces for proteins to get across, for example, through leaky gut. So the hidden intestinal allergies that Dr. Wortman talks about are these 7 categories. And so things that you could see. And so this is the idea that you may not see these intestinal symptoms. There may not be GI-type symptoms that the patient either recognizes or is concerned or complains about, but instead you see all these other types of conditions that could be presenting. They are still, though, related back to the gut and intestinal allergies or damaged intestinal gut. So they include things like respiratory conditions, sniffling, bronchitis, asthma, hay fever, allergies, sinusitis, chronic coughs, sneezing attacks, skin conditions. So in children, cradle cap, and then moving to dermatitis, acne, eczema, stomach intestinal conditions. So colics, diarrheas, constipation, flatulence, ulcers, colitis, Crohn's, digestive disorders, hyperacidity. Joint conditions, including arthritis, rheumatism, inflammation, ankylosing spondylitis. Immune conditions, so susceptibility to infections, chronic ear infections, increased or enlarged adenoid glands. Nervous disturbances, including restlessness, difficulty falling asleep, loss of concentration and memory, and finally skeletal disorders, so osteoporosis, decaying teeth, teeth with dead roots, or teeth that potentially the dentist would suggest you need a root canal. So these are all different types of things that should lead you to think back to the intestines. So Dr. Rau, when he's starting to talk about food, which is what we're going to talk about next, he says, for every food I prohibit or promote, there is a reason that is the case, and that reason is based on the precepts of Swiss biological medicine. To completely understand the diet, you should first understand the medicine. To act differently, you must first think differently. So essentially what Dr. Rau means when he's talking about this is you need to think differently about the body, you need to think differently about the gut, you need to think differently about medicine and root cause, and by thinking differently, you'll be able to take a different approach to medicine. And so when he's talking about Swiss biological medicine, in a lot of ways, he's not so much talking and preaching to the already complementary practitioners. He's talking to the medical doctors and mainstream medicine in a lot of cases about this. So the basics. So basics of the restorative and regenerative diet. The diet in general, if we were to summarize it, it's a low in protein diet. And maybe that's not even the right term for it. Perhaps it should be the correct amount of protein that the body can process in a day. So 40 to 60 grams is the amount of protein, in a lot of ways the amount of meat-based protein or mammalian-based protein that the body can actually process in a day. And this is what can be processed on a cellular level. And so if you're having more than 60 grams, which is pretty typical in a North American diet, then you're going to create excess acidity. So with the protein, it's good to be eating mainly plant-sourced and reduce the meat sources of the protein. Plant-sourced tends to be broader with the amino acids and is also more easily digested within the body. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, the diet tends to be more alkaline in nature. And so this, a healthy body is naturally more slightly alkaline. And so we want to make sure that we're always feeding our body more alkaline-like foods and to some degree also alkaline waters so that we're able to continue having our body in a healthy acid-base balance. The diet is also free of food allergens, particularly cow dairy products. Cow dairy can cause congestion, inflammation, impairment of the immune system, and it also disrupts regulation, as we already talked about with the Peyer's patches and such. And then finally, the other component in a summary of this is it's high in omega-3 essential fatty acids. It enhances cellular metabolism. It enhances and is a key component of cellular membranes. Omega-3s are responsible for transmission of neural signals, oxygenation of tissues, And when we can promote a healthy gut with healthy gut flora, then they also then can start converting and manufacturing omega-3 and omega-6, but also converting some of the omega-3s and omega-6s as well. Okay, so I have another question here from Donna about my thoughts on whey protein versus soy protein. My personal opinion is I would steer clear of both whey and soy and use a vegan-based protein. A lot of the vegan-based proteins available are pea or hemp or chia seed, or from a variety of different plant sources. And they are usually combined so that they have all the essential amino acids. Whey protein, because it's dairy, is one that you would want to be avoiding. And also soy protein, I really prefer, if people are considering soy, that they think of something, they use organic soy and not too much, not on a daily basis, not to replace protein in your daily diet, but to have as something. So, for example, if you're going to have a tea, maybe have some soy milk rather than dairy, but it would be better to have almond or a different type of milk. And also with the soy, make sure you're eating organic soy, because the majority of the soy is grown from GMO sources, and the jury is not out on the long-term effects from eating genetically modified foods at this time. Okay, so Donna, I hope that answers your question. So now I want to talk about the foods that are permitted and the foods that are to be avoided. And again, thinking this is back to restoring and regenerating the gut, and this is what we want to do and promote this. The purpose of the diet: remove primary antigens from the diet. So allergens, including the primary antigens, remember, are chicken eggs, or protein from chicken eggs, protein from dairy, mostly cow dairy, and in some cases gluten. We also want to make sure that we're also removing more types of antigens as well from the body, other types of potential allergens. The other point is to restore and rebuild the intestinal mucosa and gut flora, and then finally promote overall eating a more alkaline and less acidic diet. So foods to avoid. Let's talk about these first. So meats are one of the things, beef and pork. Doesn't mean avoid it 100%. It just means that when you're working through a restoration and regenerative component, we're going to be avoiding this for 3 months. There are chicken, turkey, and some fish options that can be used as meat proteins that are permitted. There's another reason for the meats, which I'll go into in a few minutes as well. Dairy, so cow dairy specifically to avoid, chicken eggs specifically, shellfish because they can be allergenic, and predatory fish. So these are the large fish or bottom-feeding fish. The large fish, for example, tuna, sometimes they can be high in heavy metals and different types of toxins. So little fish that are lower on the food chain are definitely preferred, things like smelts and sardines, for example. Nuts. Hazelnuts in Europe are equivalent to our peanut in North America. So often they talk about in Europe about avoiding hazelnuts. Often in North America, we talk about avoiding peanuts. So hazelnuts may not be as big of a problem for people in North America, but because Dr. Rau and Dr. Wertman are from Germany and Austria, hazelnuts are a big part of what they have their patients avoid. Citrus fruits and commercial fruit juices, mainly commercial fruit juices. There's just lots of sugar, and it could be produced from large quantities of non-organic vegetable or fruits, and so therefore there could be some pesticides and residual components that would be drunk in concentration. Histamine-rich foods, including rabbit, venison, and maybe sardines. And so if your body's already in a reactive state, adding more histamine into your diet and exposing it to the gut may also then allow the body to become even more reactive. Refined sugars, processed foods, preservatives, soda. Those in some ways are fairly self-explanatory. Yeast-containing foods, so this can be yeast and yeast-containing foods, including a lot of breads. And then finally, white flour products. So now let's talk about foods that are permitted. All vegetables, leafy greens, avocados. Leafy greens are great because they support the intestinal flora. And so leafy greens are a big part of what should be eaten on a regular basis. Seeds, all types of seeds. Sometimes if you've done some allergy testing and nuts or specific nuts are not a problem, then you could have nuts. If you want to go for a total non-allergenic diet, then take all nuts out. Sometimes cashews seem to be okay, however. Olive, sunflower, flax, and grapeseed are all good oils to consider. When cooking, remember only to have olive or grapeseed oil being used because they have a fairly high heat tolerance rate. Things like rice, whole grain rice is better. Basmati rice, Dr. Rau does say is okay though. Beans and legumes, all beans, all legumes. Organic soy, limited, and also seaweeds. Whole grains, including spelt, quinoa, and amaranth. Goat and sheep dairy in some instances, and I will talk about this in a little bit to clarify that. Fruit and fresh squeezed juices. So fresh squeezed juice, especially vegetable or fruit juices, can be used, and organic if possible. Fruit, often it's recommended if there's a lot of dysbiosis and the gut is still not strong, fruit before noon and not after, because sometimes what can happen is the fruit doesn't get digested properly and it can ferment, which can then cause a lot of gas and bloating. And also, if the gut flora haven't been balanced, it can also continue to promote the less symbiotic gut bacteria. Also chicken, turkey, and fish, I already mentioned those briefly. And one of the things that's important when we're talking to our patients, or if this is something that yourself, family, or friends is going to do, you don't want to take the meat, if you're a meat eater or a heavy meat eater, you don't want to replace your heavy meat eating with turkey, chicken, and fish. The whole point is to have it as a lower protein diet. So this is why 2 to 3 times a week is in here. Lemon juice and mild vinegars. For example, apple cider vinegar. Dr. Rau also really likes balsamic vinegar mixed with olive oil for salads. Lots of fresh water, fresh herbal teas, and Himalayan salt, herbs, and spices are different things that can be used, or sea salt. Plus, there's lots of trace elements and minerals in there. And so those are some of the foods as a general list. Now, I had a few questions pop up in here. And so overall, Vivian's asking about foods to avoid regarding the citrus. So citrus fruit is talking about citrus can be allergenic, and this would be like oranges, grapefruits, lemons, and limes. But in many cases, when we're talking about lemon juice, we're not talking about a citrus overall, but lemon juice can also be very alkalizing. So in some instances, lemon juice by itself, and Dr. Rau does talk about grapefruit juice as well. In some instances, if they don't test as positive as allergenic, then these are things that could be included. Lemon juice, even though it's acidic, it's an alkaline forming food within the body. So it's a very good one to promote alkalinity. Donna asks about coconut oil. Yes, 100% coconut oil could be within the oil list there. Dr. Rau, I don't think coconut oil in Europe is used as prevalently as it is here in North America. He still is a big proponent of grape and olive oil, grapeseed oil and olive oils. So, but coconut oil, 100% yes. And sprouted breads are definitely in a lot of ways better than non-sprouted breads to include. Okay, so now I want to talk about some of the foods, why they should be avoided. I've talked a little bit about it, but let me continue on. Okay, so again, cow's milk, hen's eggs, or chicken eggs contains primary antigens. For eggs, you could consider duck, quail, ostrich. Quail, I know in Canada, they're pretty easy to find, and so this would be a good egg substitute, unless I have a nephew who is very allergic to eggs, and it doesn't matter the type of egg for him, so it's about the protein. It's not about just the chicken egg protein, but just protein found in eggs in general. Mammalian meats. So in addition to them being too much for the body to digest, over 60 grams a day. They also are potentially very acidifying, and from the pleomorphic perspective, you have to think about mucorrhizmosis and Aspergillus niger. These are two of the endobionts that are found in every cell within the body. And so with mammalian meat, for example, with a cow, they still exist within all the cells or the meat that we're eating with the cows. Mammalian meat, if you're eating a lot of it, can end up being a source of high valence pathogenic forms of these mucorrhizmosis and Aspergillus niger. So if we're working at down-regulating and getting these into a healthy form by eating a lot of mammalian meat, especially from animals that are grown in or are raised in less than ideal conditions, and also the meat is processed through a lot of stress before the cow, I guess, is turned into meat, for lack of a better term, and then the heating process through cooking it can create high valence pathogenic forms of mucorrhizmosis and Aspergillus niger within the actual meat. So that's one of the other reasons it's not included, or it's avoided. Nuts, in some cases they can be high fat, and in some cases that's not great, and also they potentially are allergenic. Cellulose. So this is when I was talking about raw, and in some patients where we're still working on the gut, you may not want to have raw foods. You may not want them to be eating raw salads. You may want them to be eating steamed vegetables instead and stewed fruits instead of raw, because they contain cellulose. And cellulose requires a proper bacterial presence in the gut to be able to help digest it. And if there's an imbalance or there's a dysbiosis or there's atrophic mucosa, then instead what happens is the cellulose ends up fermenting and accumulates toxic gases. So for patients that have a solid digestive system that's working well, then definitely lots of raw. But if they're not, they should be starting out with cooked and steamed and stewed. Garlic and onions, in some cases, they act as digestive irritants. Histamine-rich meats, I already mentioned, may trigger allergic reactions. And fats and oils, depending on, again, how the gut is working. Bile salts that are not bound completely due to lack of sodium bicarbonate, which means an acidic body. The fats, if they're not bound properly, can act as powerful laxatives. For patients that have had their gallbladders removed, then this is something that they would know very intimately. You eat pizza with cheese on it, and there's not enough bile salts to bind the fats completely, and diarrhea occurs. So this is, again, with the fats and oils for patients that are compromised via the digestive tract. I've had another question pop up regarding the onion and the garlic, and in some cases, some people tolerate cooked better, and so raw is specifically what should be avoided. Cooked isn't so much of an issue. For somebody, though, that really has a lot of intestinal compromise, then perhaps even those should be avoided initially. So for the importance of the diet needs to be followed for approximately 6 weeks to up to 3 months. And this will, if you can have a patient, or even yourself for that matter, have them follow it for 3 months, then this is the most ideal amount of time, because it allows for the natural regeneration cycle of the body cells, intestinal tract, and the gut flora to completely happen and occur. It also means that for 3 months, or minimum 6 weeks, that you're not having extra stresses and allergens placed on the gut, so things are able to rebuild, regenerate, restore. And then if you're working with other things, which we're going to be talking about, things like probiotics, for example, and other gut restorative and regenerative things, this gives time for all of that to happen as well without the body constantly being bombarded with things that cause stress. So the other importance of the diet is by excluding the primary antigens, it allows the body to rebuild the mucosa of the small intestine. And so alternatively, an atrophy of the mucosal membrane causes a dysbiosis. And so therefore restoring the gut really is essential. It also allows for the restoration of the immune system to happen, because if you get a reduction of IgA, it will lead to leaky gut syndrome. And then finally, this also is naturally detoxifies and naturally deacidifies the body as well. And within that 6 weeks, without doing a lot of heavy-duty detoxification or acid-base balancing remedies or formulas, you still can naturally do quite a bit within that time just with food alone. Now, I have a question here that I'm going to be able to answer about the ghee and milk solids. So here's the question: cow versus goat and sheep dairy. And so all milk contains casein, which is milk protein. So if one is allergic to milk protein, meaning casein specifically, then all dairy needs to be avoided, whether it comes from a goat or a cow or a sheep or a buffalo, because this protein can destroy the Peyer's patches or the immune system in the gut. The other component, and this is one I find I get a lot of patients asking me and getting confused about this, thinking lactose intolerance is the same thing as a milk or dairy allergy, and that's not. It's really, they're two very separate things. So all milk also contains lactose or milk sugar. So if somebody is lactose intolerant, then they need to avoid dairy or they need to take a lactase enzyme at the same time as consumption. Essentially, lactose intolerance is an indication of the gut is not functioning properly. However, it is also possible, and if you look at human development naturally, is that as we get older, our lactase enzyme is produced less because if you think about it from breastfeeding, for example, then you need to be able to digest milk sugars. But then as you get older, potentially there's not the necessity for that any longer. And evolution, I guess, has not caught up to the fact that we are also consuming dairy from other animals as well. Okay, so now there's a couple more points I wanted to just talk about versus cow versus goat and sheep dairy. So cow dairy contains beta-lactoprotein. Sorry, there's a spelling mistake there. Whereas sheep and goat do not. So in some instances, if there's no sensitivity to the beta-lactoprotein, then goat and sheep dairy can be consumed. And then finally, butter. And so this also potentially would be with ghee as well. If it's a fat only, or if it's using cream, so therefore it's a fat only, it's not a protein. And so in some cases, butter or cream can then also be consumed if the person isn't showing any sensitivities as that as well. However, with that said, some butters still on the label are labeled milk, and so it's really important to look at it, and I think it really has to do with the quality of the butter, and in some cases probably also the price. Okay, so I hope that answers your question about ghee. With milk solids, if they've been precipitated out, so therefore the milk proteins have been precipitated out, in some cases then yes, they can be permitted. And Dawn, I see here you've heard of pasteurization intolerance. I haven't specifically heard of that. However, pasteurization definitely turns milk into a whole different product with the high heating and such. So definitely the whole pasteurization process of milk isn't necessarily allowing for the most beneficial nutrients to remain within the milk. Okay, and then Donna, about lactose intolerance being a lack of friendly bacteria in the gut. Well, definitely, in most cases, a lot of us need to replenish our bacteria, our friendly bacteria. So in many cases, you should probably, I guess in this case, see the lactose intolerance improve. And we're going to be talking about fermented foods in a few minutes. Okay, so here's the question. After everything we're talking about what you can't eat, what can you eat? So what can you eat? A restorative and regenerative diet is potentially difficult to follow for many patients with poor eating habits or eating habits that they've developed over time. So in a lot of ways, this is about thinking about getting back to the basics or getting back to eating the basics. And so these things include seed butters. sunflower seed, pumpkin seed, in some cases sesame seed or tahini butters. There's lots of really nice butters on the market that you can get that can be substituted for nut butters and are quite delicious. There also is a lot of different milks available. I've been a vegetarian for almost 25 years, and when I originally became a vegetarian 25 years ago, I was a teen, and I was very fortunate to have a mother who was very supportive. But I also remember at that time, there wasn't really a lot of milk alternatives available. And so today, it's really interesting to see what's available in the marketplace versus 10, 15, 20, and 25 years ago. So today, we have a plethora of different types of milk that are available, so it's easy to be able to find one that works in most types of diet scenarios or food sensitivity scenarios. Things like almond, rice, soy, quinoa, oat, and hemp milks are available. Things like steamed vegetables or roasted veggies or mashed potatoes with rice or grains are really nice combinations. Lots of interesting salads with different seeds or avocados or beans. Chili, vegetarian chili or chicken or turkey type chilies and stews. Those are definitely really good for the cooler months of the year. Legumes, hummus dips, lentil soups, different types of bean dips are all really great to consider. All kinds of soups. Any soups can be loaded with vegetables. They can become very alkaline by adding things like zucchini and parsley and carrots and potatoes. And then other easy proteins can be added in. Quinoa can be added in, which is a complete protein. Different types of beans can be added in. Rice can be added. So soups are a really good way to be able to get a lot of nutrition into the body in a fairly easy way. And because it's also cooked, therefore anybody with digestive issues or fermentation issues, soups are something that are pretty easy on the gut. In cases of people with more sensitive digestion, fruit and raw vegetables before noon, cooked vegetables, cooked fruit all the time, and if somebody can handle it, then the raw veggies or fruit after noon. Manna or sprouted breads, rye breads, rice flours. There's so many gluten-free options now available, which is really nice. Not always maybe tasting the best, but I think they're getting better and better. One of the other things that I find, I have a buckwheat bread that can be used. I have a question here about why rye flour. If somebody doesn't have gluten sensitivity, then rye bread can be used. A lot of the time rye bread, especially if it's more traditional rye bread, tends to be a pretty wholesome food. So that's one of the reasons with rye flour. Chicken, fish, and turkey dishes. There's so many different things that you can do with those three things. Homemade desserts, banana bread sweetened with honey or stevia, or also maple syrup can be considered. So Dr. Rau says it's not so much about the sweetened, he permits sweetened things. He permits molasses, he permits honey, he permits maple syrup, he permits stevia, he permits agave syrups, but in limited quantity. And what he really doesn't say is all the processed sugars. That's stuff that he wants you to stay away from. And there's also other types of desserts that can be stewed fruits. All kinds of really delicious muffins can be made. And then finally, think about some of the other types of cultures and their foods. Japanese, Mexican, Mediterranean, and all kinds of Indian dishes can be very delicious, lower protein or lower animal protein and high vegetable alkaline foods, and also easy ones. I have done this diet a number of different times over time just to jumpstart some restoration. And Japanese has been always one of my go-tos because if you're out and about and you need an easy lunch or dinner, then that's one that mostly fits into all the categories. Okay, and so just before I continue, there was one more question that came up from Vivian about raw dairy. It goes back to the whole thing about the actual dairy proteins and them being an issue. So if dairy proteins are not an issue, then raw dairy may be something to definitely consider because it's less pasteurized and it may have more components that are healthy to it. I'm not personally, like when we're talking about milk per se, I'm not a big proponent of recommending milk as something to be drinking. There are definitely other things like cheeses and such perhaps, but drinking milk on a daily basis is not something I personally promote. However, with that said, if milk is going to be drank, definitely raw if it's available. I know in Canada it's hard to get. In the U.S., I think I've even read in some cases it is classified as almost illegal, which is an interesting thing even in itself. So Jamie Oliver, I have friends and cousins who laugh at me because they're always like, oh, Heather's always talking about Jamie Oliver. Jamie Oliver, I like his principles. I like the way that he cooks. I like the fact that he goes into his garden and then he pulls out a whole bunch of vegetables and goes and sits down and makes a beautiful looking meal from it. I like that in the limited cooking shows that I've seen of his, that he uses simple, clean ingredients. He uses whole ingredients and he doesn't get things too complicated. And also, I have a number of his cookbooks. I like them too because they're about getting back to the basics. And so this is why I've included Jamie Oliver tonight. This is what he said in one of the introductions. Food is one of life's greatest joys, yet we've reached this really sad point where we're turning food into the enemy and something to be afraid of. So when I talk about having a healthy approach to food and eating better, I'm talking about achieving that sense of balance. Lots of good stuff, loads of variety, and the odd indulgence every now and then. I think that overall, this is a really good practical sense to think about. Lots of good food, lots of variety, odd indulgence every now and then. So here's a few different types of recipe ideas. The top left are zucchini. They're called zucchini boats. Zucchini is an extremely alkaline food. It's also a fairly low-calorie food, so it's something that can be used to fill the body up. And it's something that also can be used in a lot of different recipes and just kind of adds to it. So you can stuff zucchini with a variety of different things. This one looks like, I think it's a turkey recipe, so you can use turkey and rice. You could use different types of beans. You could use quinoa and then add lots of yummy vegetables. You could use a cheese on top, or you could use a vegan cheese or no cheese at all and just bake them. So a nice, healthy, easy dish that follows the restorative or regenerative diet. On the top right is African nut butter stew. In the follow-up email, I'm going to make sure that I include this recipe. It's one of my very favorites, and it's a hypoallergenic one as well. It includes almond butter rather than peanut butter. It's really delicious, loads of veggies, and you can put quinoa or put it over quinoa. It's definitely a hit also with the kids, so I'm going to make sure that I include that recipe for you. On the bottom left-hand corner is a shredded beet and carrot slaw. This is one of Dr. Rau's favorite things. So in his book, The Swiss Secret of Optimal Health, he uses this in a lot of his daily diets for lunch. And so he uses shredded beets, shredded carrots, and shredded zucchini. You can add some nuts to it if you want to add some protein, or some seeds, sorry. And then he often has it with olive oil and lemon juice, or olive oil and balsamic vinegar. It's really easy to do, extremely alkaline. With the vegetables shredded like that, overall it's easy for the body to digest, and it's pretty delicious as well. Good way to get extra beets into your system. And then finally on the bottom right-hand corner is a quinoa salad. Quinoa is a complete protein, and it is easily digested. It cooks up really well. It's very tasty, and it goes with a lot of different things. It's easy to make into a salad. It's easy to have as a side dish with steamed veggies, and so it's definitely, for myself as a vegetarian, one of my personal go-tos. I use it in a lot of things, and I sneak it into a lot of things for my 3-year-old as well. Now, here's a basic alkaline and acidic forming foods. What I would recommend, find a chart, an alkaline, acidic food chart that you really like. There's a good one in a nutritional book called Prescription for Nutritional Healing, and it's one of the ones that I've often followed. There is a variety of different ones available on the websites and on the internet, so you can definitely find a lot of good information. Some go into a lot of detail, and so there's acidic and then partially acidic and partially alkaline forming foods, so you can get into a lot of detail. But just in general, basics. Acid forming foods include things like alcohol, tea, and coffee. And when I talk about tea, I mean black tea in this case, not herbal teas. Meat, dairy, sugar, white processed foods, flour. Those are overall tend to be the acid-forming foods. And if you look at this list, this often includes a daily diet that people are eating as well. Alkaline-forming foods, most fruit and almost all vegetables are alkaline-forming. And lemon juice, even though it's acidic by nature, it's an alkaline-forming food. And then you have your beans and legumes and grains kind of fit in between the two. So when you're talking and thinking about alkaline, fruit and vegetables are the big way to go with that. So alkalizing then, when we're talking about alkalizing, I'm now going to move away from talking about food because food is important to maintain an acid-base balance within the body. Food can also, if the body is more acidic or has shifted more to an acid place, food can be used to shift back into a more acid-base balance, a more alkaline state. However, with that said, it takes a long time and a lot of dedication. So if you want to do it quickly, then you use an alkalizer. And that's what I want to talk about now is quickly mechanically shifting the acid out of the body. And so with this, we look at pH. pH measures the concentration of hydrogen ions in the tissues. An acidic terrain is prone to inflammation, reactions, toxic buildup, and potential for chronic conditions. So we want to be reducing the amount of excess hydrogen ions, which is causing the acidity in the body. So the goal with alkalizing is flush the excess of hydrogen ions out of the tissues and obtain a normal acid-base balance. This is done through natural buffering minerals in the body, including calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium. But the key is in an alkalizer is bicarbonate. So you find that with sodium bicarbonate and potassium bicarbonate. And when you're using the bicarbonate, it ends up, the sodium potassium take the bicarbonate into the cells through the sodium potassium pumps. The bicarbonate then becomes raw material for the formation of enzymes in the pancreas, bile in the liver, and hydrochloric acid in the stomach. So this bicarbonate, it's doing a lot of different things. Number one, it's supporting digestion. It's supporting enzymes, bile, and hydrochloric acid. And number two, what it's doing through these processes is it's using up the excess hydrogen ions or the acidity in the body. So you're getting better digestion overall with an alkalizer, but you're also then getting the acidity also out of the body. Now, in order to determine where somebody's acid base is or how acidic their body is, you want to be measuring the pH levels. And the most ideal is a complete picture using blood, saliva, and urine through BETA or BTA testing. For many of us, we're not able to draw blood, and so therefore looking at the urine then would be the next and easiest way to do it. And so the urine gives you an indication of the pH levels in the tissues and how well the body is excreting excessive acid or hydrogen ions out of the body. Here's just a quick image from a dark field, which is a really nice tool to look at acid-base balance. And this is a very congestive picture with a lot of fibrin, so this can indicate an acidic body or tissue acidosis. So the art of alkalizing then. To begin with, we're going to be looking at the first morning urine. So generally the first morning urine is somewhere between 6.0 to 6.5 range. The first morning urine is always more acidic, and then the rest of the day the urine is 6.8 to 7.4. If when you take the pH of the first morning urine and then the subsequent urine throughout the day, if the urine is below the normal readings, then that's going to be indicating tissue acidosis. And that would be then the trigger to want to actually work with an alkalizer. The ideal times to take an alkalizer are 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. because it supports the circadian rhythms in the body, or the low times for the pancreas. However, what's more important than those two times is making sure an alkalizer is taken on an empty stomach with warm water. And so if 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. don't work with an empty stomach and warm water, then it's better just to do it in the morning and in the evening. The warm water is important so that the alkalizer doesn't sit in the stomach, but rather it allows the pyloric sphincter to open up so the alkalizer can bypass through the stomach and into the duodenum, where then it can start doing its action. The other thing is empty stomach. You don't want to neutralize the stomach acid during digestion. You want the digestive process to continue on. So, and the other thing too is if the stomach's not empty and you take an alkalizer, a lot of the time what happens is you start burping, and it's pretty unpleasant. Now, with an alkalizer, you want to take it for anywhere between 1 to 3 months. It takes about 3 months, but it can take upwards of 6 months to mechanically shift the excess acid out of the body. And then you want to follow up with an alkaline diet and also alkaline water. And to be able to monitor where a patient is at, then what is recommended is after each month to have them stop alkalizing for a few days, measure the pH, and determine if the alkalizing needs to continue with according to the pH levels. Okay, so now before I continue on with talking about a few alkalizers, there's a few questions that came up. So Beth has asked about sodium bicarbonate on a sodium-restricted diet and high blood pressure. So with the high blood pressure, there is a sodium-sensitive high blood pressure. Then in this case, sodium bicarbonate is probably not going to be the best thing to take. We do have two milder alkalizers, basic tab and basic powder. So in these cases, they have less sodium than Pleo Alkali does, and in some cases, then this may be the way to go. However, with sodium-restricted diet or a sodium-sensitive blood pressure, then you may not want to be considering those remedies at that time, but rather use something like in the Pleo Sanum line, Pleo Citro and Pleo Sanavis. And they both work as alkalizers from an organic acid perspective in the body. And it would take longer to do it, but these would be ones to consider to be moving acid out of the body. So Beth, I hope that answers your question there. And then from Dawn, I've got a question here about the BTA. Now, let's see here. Ideally, with the BTA, from how I understand it, it has to be done with blood, urine, and saliva to get a complete picture. However, what Dawn is saying is that all that really requires is the saliva and the urine. So in some cases, then, for those of you that are not able to draw blood, then the BTA is still being able to, you can still use it. Easily enough, though, looking at the urine, you're able to get a lot of good information. You can also look at the saliva to also get a lot of good information as well. And with the saliva, I'm not going to be talking about it so much tonight, but it's a really good indication of how the mineral reserves are in the body and your stress reaction and how the adrenal glands are functioning. Okay, so let me continue on here. So the alkalizer lineup, there's 4 options through Biomed. There's 1 option through Terramedica. So let's talk about that one first. So through Biomed and Terramedica, we have the Pleo Alkali powder, and this is one of the Pleo Sanum remedies. I think actually the next slide, 2 slides away, I've got it. Okay, so let's talk about that in a moment then. So we've got the Pleo Alkali powder, and then we've got basic powder and basic tab, and then finally we have Alka-Tab. So I'm going to go through these 4 remedies individually. So, and then with the alkalizer, pH papers, you're going to want to be using some pH papers to be able to measure the pH of the urine or saliva when you're doing it. And so we do carry pH papers, and pH papers do come in the box with Alcala, and that's what the indicator looks like, and that's the basic range that it has. It actually goes a little bit higher. It goes up to 8.0. So with the Alcala then, this one is sodium bicarb, potassium bicarb, and sodium citrate. So it is definitely a heavy sodium formula, but it's working to quickly mechanically shift the acid out of the body. And remembering, though, it's not meant to be replacing minerals. It's just meant to be shifting acid out of the body. It's generally taken for 1 to 3 months. It can be taken longer, but usually after 3 months, if somebody still needs to take it, you would do it every other day or every third day, and continue to monitor every month to see where they're at. This, it's a powder, so it is mixed with water. It can be fairly salty, and so in some cases I recommend, rather than 4 ounces of water, to have 8 ounces of water instead. Now, basic tab and basic powder through Biomed in Canada, the formula is the same. It contains calcium carbonate, magnesium carbonate, potassium bicarbonate, and sodium bicarbonate. And the idea with these is, again, to mechanically shift the acid out, but it includes all 4 of the base minerals in the body. It can be taken for longer term use than general Alcala. The basic tab is handy for those who are traveling and for those of us and for our patients who don't like to drink a liquid. Then the basic tabs are easy to take. They dissolve within 1 minute in the stomach, so they're also very effective. It's the one that I personally use just because I find it the easiest. I don't have to think too much. I just need to get some warm water. Okay, and then for Alcatab then, this one is specifically, it's just sodium bicarbonate. Now, I often get the question, why can't I just take baking soda, Arm & Hammer, for example? One of the things to just understand about that is when you're buying baking soda, yes, it's food grade, but it's not necessarily pharmaceutical grade. And so with the food grade, there's potential for more additives in there. There could be flow agents. In some cases, like baking powder, for example, there can be aluminum. And so it's not generally recommended overall that people alkalize using baking soda or sodium bicarbonate by itself, because it's not balanced. It's not sodium bicarbonate and potassium bicarbonate. It doesn't potentially have other minerals in there in the formula as well. So the idea when you're using sodium bicarbonate, or Alcatab in this case, it's pharmaceutical grade sodium bicarbonate, and it's used specifically to decrease acute inflammation in the gut due to food allergies and environmental allergies. It can also help to relieve excessive acidity due to allergies and asthma. So it tends to be used for about 10 days, and it's to rapidly reduce inflammation in the gut. And so during allergy season, when all of a sudden allergies are flaring up, or during food allergy type things or inflammatory processes, this is generally when this formula is used. And okay, so now before I go on to some other recommendations, I've got another bunch of questions here that I just want to address. Okay. Donna, I see here you've asked about me typing the names in. I'm not sure which names you were referring to. It may be Alcala, Basic Powder, Basic Tab, and Alcatab, which I can definitely get that typed in for you as well. I'm going to also be including a little bit of information in a follow-up email about all of these different things. And I'm also going to be including a PDF of the presentation in the email so that you'll have all of the information I've talked about tonight. Okay, now Christina has asked about citrus fruits on the list. The citrus fruits overall, if somebody has a strong allergic tendency, sometimes citrus can flare them up. So this would be something you'd want to investigate if they're sensitive to citrus. And in that case, then it could be orange, grapefruit, lemon, and lime. But on the flip side, if citrus doesn't seem to be an allergen, then lemon, specifically in the form of lemon juice, often can be okay, so it's an individual basis. If you're going for total hypoallergenic, then take lemon right out of there as well for the time being. Okay, so Donna's asking if somebody has high blood pressure, what to be using. That would be the two formulas that I mentioned, Pleo Citro and Pleo Sanavis. Those are two really nice alkalizing formulas that can be used. They work differently because they don't contain the bicarbonate. The other thing is you need to also investigate what kind of high blood pressure somebody has. If it's sodium sensitive high blood pressure, then in that case, Alcal is not the formula for them. Okay, now Vivian has asked, Pleo Alcala, is it uniquely for alkalizing? Yes, that's the purpose. That's what in biological medicine with pleosanam therapy, it's classified as a milieu modulator. It's meant as an alkalizer, and that's its main thing that it's meant for. It's a specific formula that's formulated in Germany, and so it's got sodium bicarbonate, potassium bicarbonate, and sodium citrate, and it's meant for rapid alkalizing or rapid mechanically shifting acid out of the body. And so it's really a really nice, well-rounded formula for that. Basic powder and basic tab, which are two products under the Biomed or Canadian label, they are also alkalizers. However, they are meant for gentler or milder alkalizing. They can be used for longer term, and they're also formulas that are originally from Germany as well. Okay. Okay. Now, I'm just going to check here for one more question from, okay, Donata, I see here that you've just asked. The Q&A section is just below the chat section, so you can type your question in there. The other option is just type it directly into the chat room, and I can also answer it from there as well. There's a few more recommendations that I just want to talk about that are just general recommendations for helping support the gut. So we talked a lot about food for restoration and regeneration, and so these are some other formulas that can be used for restoration, regeneration, and also just gut health in general. So Luvos. Luvos is a mineral earth that's mined in Germany. It's essentially a mineral earth that is from the glaciers receding. So it's old mineral earth that is not contaminated with aluminum, so it's a really clean product. And as far as healing earth, there's no additives. It's mined from mineral-rich glacial deposits in Germany. It's an ultra-fine powder that can be used externally, so on the skin, or it can be used internally. The way it works is it has a large surface area, so it's high absorption and binding capacity of toxins, impurities, and bacteria. So it's taken essentially to be able to do all this kind of binding. For internally, for GI therapeutic use, it works like a cleansing sponge, and it can be used for detoxification, diarrhea, ulcers, heartburn, reflux, parasites, inflammatory conditions, and it's really good overall just to be supporting the gut and regeneration at that time. It's something that's really easy to use, and the capsules were created so that you don't have to drink a glass full of clay or mud. So you take the capsules, but take it with a large glass of water, and then it does what it needs to do. This also does come in a powder form, so it can be used topically, or the powder form, you can mix it with water and also drink it. Okay. Now, Donata, I do see your question here. What I'll do is I'll answer this one in a few minutes for you, okay? So another product, Oxyplex caps. This one is magnesium. It's actually magnesium peroxide, and it is used in the gut to throw a whole bunch of oxygen into the gut. So it helps reduce the number of pathogenic intestinal flora, but specifically anaerobic intestinal flora. and by releasing these reactive oxygen species. So therefore, it controls a whole variety of symptoms that can be related to bacterial infections, including things like Lyme holds, acute gastritis, enzyme deficiency, dysbiosis, dyspepsia, enteritis, flatulence. And it can be used also for constipation or to evacuate the bowels. Now, this is one thing to definitely remember. It can cause bowel evacuation, so it's one of those formulas that initially get a patient starting on the weekend so that they can just see how their body's going to react to it, and they don't have to be running off to the toilet if the bowels decide that they need a cleansing at that time. It's also important to drink it with lemon juice. You need an acid because that helps to activate it, and it's taken for a fairly short period of time, for a week. It works often a bit like a cleanse. Okay, and then we also have 3C, and 3C is Complete Colon Cleanse. This formula, intestinal health, bowel cleanse, and also for constipation. It's a variety of different sources of fiber and antimicrobial and demulcent herbs to support the gastrointestinal tract and for detoxification. And this one's also taken with lots of water, specifically because glucomannan, which is a high viscous fiber, you just want to make sure that there's enough water so that it doesn't clog things up or get stuck in the esophagus. And then we also have a few different probiotics. So with Biomed, we have two different probiotics. One's called Probiotic 7-in-1, and it's a 7-strain probiotic. It's uniquely designed so that there's a variety of strains. This product specifically is acid stable and also shelf stable. So it's one that does not need to be kept in the fridge, or it can be taken on holiday and while traveling. And with the acid stable, it is able to make it through the gut into the small intestine. And then our other probiotic is Lactobacillus sporogenes. It's a single ingredient. It has FOS, or fructose oligosaccharides, which is a prebiotic essentially for the probiotics. It also is shelf stable. It is a very alkalizing form because it produces right-spinning lactic acid in the intestinal tract, and it's really good after antibiotics in cases of diarrhea and help to normalize the pH in the gut. And then we also carry 3 different digestive enzymes. Biozyme is a general digestive enzyme, Digestizyme is a high-potency digestive enzyme, and Lipidzyme is a fat digestive enzyme. For more information on these, you can always email me to get the monograph, or I am more than happy also to just direct you to the website. And on our website, the Biomed website, we have detailed information on all of these products. So this was Secret to Optimal Health. This is the book by Dr. Rau that I initially mentioned. This book, he brought this book together for patients. So at Paracelsus Clinic in Switzerland, the idea is he sees a lot of very chronic degenerative type conditions. He sees a lot of arthritis and rheumatitis. He sees a lot of autoimmune conditions. He sees a lot of cancers. And all of his patients go on this restorative and regenerative diet. And this book essentially outlines it. So this book was really written for the patient. However, it's a really good read. It talks about biological medicine very basically, but in a very nice way. And then he talks about this whole thing we've talked about tonight about restoration and regeneration and eating for that. He outlines a diet, so there's a 10-day intensive and a 3-week intensive, and then also then maintenance. He includes hundreds of recipes and lots of really good ideas. There's also a really good liver detox in there, how to do a safe liver detox, and but a very intensive one as well. So this book does cover a lot. It's available through Biomed, and it's available through Terra Medica. And so this is one that I definitely urge you to get, because there's a lot of good information, but more is that the regenerative and restorative components of diet and the whole idea behind this book really outlines all of that and then gives some guidelines on how to put it in a weekly basis. So with that then, and before I answer the questions, I want to say thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar tonight on eating for restoration and regeneration. I always appreciate when people are interested to hear more. I love your feedback, and I bid you a good evening.